Hello and welcome to the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things. Recorded live at the 18th Annual Florida Writers Conference. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. I'm your host, Allison Nissen, and today I am lucky enough to have with me Jan Little. Jan, can you give me a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
I write poetry, and then also I write short stories, and I'm working on a science fiction fantasy series. I'm working on Volume 1, and during NaNoWriMo, I will start Volume 2.
Fantastic. Have you done NaNoWriMo before?
Yes, I have, when I lived in Nashville.
And were you successful?
Well, I think anything you start, the very beginning, but I didn't make it all the way through that month. So this will be the month where I make it through and also revise Volume 1.
Are you going to do those at the same time?
Yes.
Wow. You're going to be busy.
Well, I'm retired, so I have the time now.
All right. And in case someone doesn't know, NaNoWriMo is the National Novel Writing Month. And worldwide, a whole bunch of people sit down and try to write a novel of 50,000 words or more in 30 days.
Well, I now have 3 Florida Writing Association t-shirts that I can rotate while I'm writing them. That will help keep me motivated.
I like that. That's really good. That's really good. You ought to number them days 1 through 10.
so one will always be clean.
That's right. That's right.
And then I'm going to find all the coffee shops where writers meet, and then we'll write together there.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And they do those writing sprints, so it activates your brain, and all of a sudden you have new ideas. That's fantastic. I say fantastic way too often. Anyway, poetry. Tell me about poetry.
I went to Florence because I wanted to write a fantasy novel, and I went to Florence because I knew I needed to work on description. I'd been away from it for a long time in writing, and when I got to the workshop, suddenly poetry started coming out. I've been working on it off and on, I guess, for 10, 12 years. And then in December, it was the first time I was published in Adelaide Literary Journal. And then they published 3 more when I submitted them this spring or this summer. And they want to do my poetry chapbook. Now I have to come up with some more poems to make up a chapbook.
Well, you have to go back to Florence.
Oh, it was amazing.
I bet. So you did a 10-day workshop there?
Well, what I did was I had read Under the Tuscan Sun, and I wanted to go to Tuscany, so I found a workshop in Florence, and so I combined the 2 loves there. So I would go and write in the morning, and then I'd go out exploring in the afternoon and evening.
Great experience.
It was awesome.
So where are you going to get your inspiration for your chapbook?
I go everywhere. I got a short story from when I went to one in Ireland, and then came up with a poem in Berlin when I went this past spring, on the Central European cities, and a poem came out in Berlin, and so I go to the beach sometimes in the winter.
What topics do you usually write on for your poetry?
A lot of it came out of when my parents died in 2008 and 2009, and so I wrote during that time, and that kind of helped me with the grieving. And then in Ireland, then that was 18 days where I would travel around and then write, and then I've been modifying them and polishing them up and submitting, and some of those are the ones that are doing well and being published now.
Do you have your own personal definition of poetry?
No, I really don't. I do know that metaphysical really talks to me from John Donne, where you go from the concrete to the abstract, and yet sometimes I start out with the abstract and go to the concrete in terms of what does it mean to me when I have these feelings. But a lot of times it's also just concrete. But I think John Donne and Robert Browning, with his dramatic monologues, really have influenced me the most in writing poetry.
You go from poetry to fantasy.
But I love Tolkien. I fell in love with Tolkien in 9th grade, and it was just amazing. And so I looked for him. Ellie Modisette Jr. is one of my all-time favorites. A lot of Brandon Sanderson's. Elantris was the first one I've read of his that I really loved. And so they tell you to write what you love, and so that has always talked to me.
And in your fantasy stories, give me a little nugget of what you might include in a fantasy story.
This is a story of kids who are being abducted and trafficked because they either have special abilities or for their looks. And they form their own army to save other kids. They save themselves, and then they go looking for other kids to save because they don't want them to have to go through what they have.
And this is a young adult book, so you're targeting 14 to 20-year-olds?
10, 11, 12, and
10,
of course
11,
they'll grow, they'll age.
Shows you what I know about the, the young adult market.
So they start out, I guess, preteens, because of course they would not want them, in terms of that the younger kids, but they would age, and of course they would keep that with them, as far as that urge to save other people who'd lost their families because of this.
Interesting. Is this your first fantasy book?
Yes.
Do you have any more planned?
Just the sequence, the series of
series.
3.
Series are so popular.
Well, it just works out too, because I've got the maps drawn. They're not well drawn the way some of them are in the books and whatever, but I have a plan of where the story travels and how, in different countries and characteristics.
Do you use the countries you've traveled to write your poetry in order to be inspired by where these children travel to?
Well, there's a lot of it is, if you take the medieval times, which is usually the 1300s, which is when a lot of fantasy is set. And so I found that France really works, medieval France really works a lot for my geography, especially in this volume 1. And then I'll go to like the Mediterranean-like countries through the Mediterranean Sea around that area.
And I imagine you get to go visit these places.
Well, I will need to go to Greece, don't you think?
I definitely think you need to go to Greece. You could probably do a poem in the morning, a little fantasy in the afternoon, and then
wine,
of course. And I'll tell you, I had the opportunity to go to Greece, and let me tell you, I ate Greek salad morning, noon, and night. We must have had 20 salads in like the 5 days I was there. So delicious. And yes, they call them Greek salads, at least in Athens when I was there. But you also write short stories. Tell me about your short stories.
The first short story was an accident. I was taking fiction in graduate school in my 30s, and the first day of class, the professor says, if you want to make an egg in here, you need a portfolio of 36 to 50 pages. And I had been a journalist for 6, 7, 8 years writing nonfiction. I had nothing. So I immediately went home on my electric typewriter, which it was, when you got frustrated, you could rip the pages out and throw them across the room, which I missed that part. And I certainly had to start writing seriously. And that's where the first short story that I've entered into this year's Literary Palms. And it's a finalist.
Wow.
So my writing coach, Jaden Terrell, is the one who helped me last summer on it. And because she came down and stayed with me for a personal workshop. And I suddenly thought, I don't have enough for her to read for my fantasy novel. So I started pulling out my poetry, and I started pulling out the short stories. So what do you think of these? Are these worth anything? And she liked the short story, so I finished it while she was there. And it's just really wonderful to submit a short story and a poem the first year, thinking, gee, I have something good enough just to submit, and to be a finalist. That's a winner for me.
And you are referring to the Royal Palm Literary Awards.
Yes.
The Royal Palm Literary Awards, which are the Florida Writers Association big things where we allow our members to submit their work, and then they are held up for comparison to others and awards given. And of course, we have our big awards dinner, which is a really wonderful event. And so this is your first conference?
Now, I came last year, but this is the first conference here that I've entered anything. And then to be a semifinalist was huge, and then to be a finalist, I mean, that's a winner to me. It doesn't matter what else happens at the banquet. I've been a winner just getting this far with my first time. So
it took you a little bit of gumption to feel qualified just to submit.
Yes, I mean that was a huge goal. I'm going to have something good enough to submit. That was my goal.
Tell me about the anxiety that you had prior to submitting. What was the thought process of, I don't know if I can do this, to, all right.
Well, I've been submitting to literary magazines and poetry and stuff. And so last November is when I started getting really nice rejection letters. And then December was when I began being published in poetry. And then my short story kept picking up these, well, it's not right for our market, but we really like it. Keep us in mind to submit something else. So I had enough courage to submit, and so all I said was I just came to the conference feeling like I'm a submitted writer. That's all that was all my holy feeling. So that was I reached this bar, and now I've got to set a bar higher for the next time.
What is your editing process like?
I constantly go through writing and revising, and then when I think I've got it close to, I send it to my writing coach, Jaden Terrell, that I've talked about before, and then she and I confer Skyping or by email or by telephone, and then we talk about what she sees that I need to change, and then I go back through just because she tells me something now I've gotten far enough along. Sometimes, no, that wasn't quite right, Beth, but everything else works that you said. So I think that shows growth too.
Do you like working with a coach?
I love working with her. She just has really made the biggest difference in me as a writer.
So how do you arrange, when you're working with a coach, do you have a submission schedule?
Sometimes, as far as for the contest, I say, okay, I've got it. I want to send this story off to the contest, and I try to give her a month's notice. Because she's a writer, so she has conferences and other clients also. So we kind of work around that. What's convenient for you? What works for me? And then I'm looking for a writing group so that I can do critiques with them, so that I can kind of grow with the other chapters and stuff too. Also,
writers groups are a wonderful way
Absolutely.
to connect and stay relevant and know what's going on in the market. And everyone has different ideas, and it's a lot of, I find writers groups very, very helpful.
Absolutely.
Well, let's see. So you were also a teacher.
Yes. AP English, and also in college, a college instructor, English 101, 102 in University of Maryland in Belgium for a year.
I used to teach composition, and I always called it grade 13. And people would look at me funny.
It is.
Because that's what it was. It was grade 13. They came from 12th grade, and I'm like, now you're in grade 13.
Absolutely.
But I loved my students. I always did. Had a lot of fun talking to them. Now I'm teaching humanities courses.
Oh, those are fun too. Those are so interesting.
They are very interesting. I could go off on a totally different tangent, but right now we're talking about Jan Little and her writing. And tell me about, when you're writing your short stories, what are those about? So you write fantasy, you write poetry.
The short stories seem to be, I have three. One that I also sent out to be submitted to Black Fox Literary Magazine. And they start out with female protagonists, usually journalists, because that was what I was back in my 20s. And they go through a time where they're just totally beaten down, and then how do they work through that and come out and so that they're okay with themselves? What does it take for them to overcome those odds, move through them, and then succeed?
I love strong female characters.
But this is the one I'm working on right now. She gets beaten down to, I call it a 6-point font of no, and then she's got to get back up to that 12-point font of no, where it's healthy, it's balanced, and it's going to take her, she's going to have to go way on to the 72-point bold just to break through from being labeled and held back.
Very
to
creative.
Get back to balance.
Very creative way of looking at the character. Jan, how could people get in touch with you?
I have a writer's workshop, I have a writer's page, rjtrip.com on WordPress. That's my great-grandmother's name, Ruth, and then Jan, and then Tripp was her maiden name. And then I have a Facebook page, Jan Little, here in Orlando. And then I'm on Twitter, JanL717. And then I'm also on Instagram.
You like to cover the gamut. Good for you.
I'm learning.
It is a process.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, Jan, this has been absolutely wonderful to have you with me. Are you ready to switch gears and move to our rapid fire questions?
I will do my best.
It's not pass fail, so you should do great. What's your favorite color?
Green.
Green. Why?
It's nurturing, warm, growth.
Do you have a favorite piece of jewelry?
Yes, I do. This is an Australian boulder opal. And I just like the trilogy, whatever, three stones together, and the greens and the different colors, the contrast.
Again, we're back to green. Nice and nurturing. If you were a shape, what would you be?
Thin.
Thin. I guess I opened that one up, huh? I was looking at pictures on the wall thinking square, round, oval, or hexagonal. I don't know what I would be. I don't know. That's great. All right, Jan, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you.
This has been another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. Allison out.
Jan Little is a retired English instructor and journalist who writes poetry, short stories, and a fantasy series. She's a member of the Florida Writers Association. For more information about Jan, visit her on the web, rjtripp.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web at floridawriters.net.